There is a cliche that the diaspora's migration crowds out opportunities for homegrown talent and national innovation through the so-called brain drain. But as it is often the case, there are many initiatives that defy the cliches. So some are state-led, like the Rwandan Diaspora Engagement Project, which harnesses the expertise of diaspora in key sectors, while some are campaigns like the Year of Return, which fosters connections with people of African descent. I would like to explore the many modalities through which the diaspora can make a positive difference at an individual level and on a national scale, leading to increased innovation. Hence, to enlighten us on this subject today, I have invited Funsho Allu, Dominic Mwenja, and Loksan Harley. Loksan Harley is a UK-based British-Chinese independent migration and diaspora specialist and executive director at Homelands Advisory. He has extensive experience as a consultant to the United Nations, governments, and nonprofits in research, policy development, capacity building, and technical assistance across Europe, Africa, and the Asia-Pacific regions. In particular, he has conducted research and advised on diaspora engagement in around 30 countries. Loksan also hosts the Migration and Diaspora podcast, one of the top podcasts on migration and diaspora engagement. Loksan has delivered projects for clients, including the International Organization for Migration, the International Center for Migration Policy Development, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, better known as GIZ, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNDP, USAID, and the Swiss Foundation for Technical Cooperation. He also serves as a member of the Executive Leadership Council of the African Diaspora Network, a fast-growing diaspora organization located in Silicon Valley. Dominic Mwenja has over 30 years of experience in consulting, teaching, executive leadership, and management of various institutions in the US, Asia, and Kenya. I won't mention each one of his roles because his CV is simply dizzying. But crucially, he has been CEO and program director of Miramar International Foundation since 2017. The foundation has operations in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Zambia in agriculture, education, healthcare, and business development. He's also chairman of the Central Bank of Kenya's pension fund. Previously, he was a member of the first National Steering Committee on Curriculum Reform in Kenya between 2016 and 17, and the CEO of Mater Hospital, which is one of the largest private nonprofit hospitals in Kenya from 2018 to 2021. Last but not least, Funsho Allu is a trustee of Pharo Foundation and a founding partner of TIA Capital. He's based in Nairobi and oversees the East African and Francophone business. Most recently, he was a founding partner of 46 Parallels, a joint venture between TIA Capital and the JMH Group. 46 Parallels specializes in private debt in sub-Saharan Africa, ex-South Africa, and he built it over a 3-year period with his fellow TIA Capital partners. Before co-founding TIA Capital, Funsho headed the EMEA hedge fund business for AIG and the multi-strategy hedge fund allocation business at PineBridge. His earlier career was at Goldman Sachs and Petercam Capital. Okay, tell me, each one of you, about your journey as a member of the diaspora and how you think it has shaped your own capacities for innovation. So maybe we started off with Loksan.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure to share the stage and share the microphone with you all. My own story, so I'm half Chinese. My mother's from Hong Kong, and I was born and brought up in the UK. And then later on, I studied in Canada and then lived in Belgium, Burkina Faso. And then I actually ended up doing my own diaspora return in my mid-20s to China. And how has that shaped me. I mean, so many ways, really. I mean, I'd say from an early age, there's that general migrant mindset that I was brought up with, that work ethic, the focus on just trying to do to better your life compared with your parents and your ancestors that or your parents that moved over. From the age of 15, I was working at a Chinese takeaway, while a lot of my school friends in England wouldn't have been doing that, or wouldn't have had that expectation at least to start work that early, and that led me to observe the uncle that was my boss, who was working all the hours that you can imagine to expand his business. So I think early on, I had that exposure to both that work ethic and that migrant run business mindset. And then later on, when I actually did my diaspora return, I think the amazing thing when you're a member of a diaspora is that you take what you know from your own country, you mix it with what you learn in the countries that you go to, and then what comes out is something that can be greater than the sum of its parts. So when I moved to China, I then was a returning member of the Chinese diaspora, but you could also say that I was then a member of the UK diaspora. And so that led me to start various businesses, including one where I would bring Chinese students over to the UK, every summer, and working with Chinese partners, but then utilizing my contacts and networks back home as well. So I think, those are just a few ways. I wouldn't say I'm in the innovator class that perhaps some of our other guests are in, but yeah, I'd definitely say that diaspora background has fundamentally shaped my path through life.
Excellent. Dominic?
Yeah, fantastic. It's nice to listen to Loksan and the journey. I think I pretty much have. For me, I was born in Kenya. Then in my early 20s, I left for the US to, of course, finish my education. I finished my bachelor's, my master's, my PhD. Then, like most Africans, we usually we work very hard when we go to the other side, and I think Funsho can probably tell you the same. We work very hard. We are very driven. So I was driven to succeed. Then after working for so many years, and then coming back to Kenya, and having traveled to many countries, mostly in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, the whole thing, and doing some programs there as well. Mixing that experience and the American experience, I felt it was time for me to go back home and see what I can do to help my country. I've always been a big fan of reverse brain drain because I looked at how South Korea was actually impacted by the reverse brain drain. We've also seen what it has done to the Indian high tech sector, and now to the Chinese high tech sector. So it's an important part of the entire labor migration across the world, where the cross fertilization of the experiences that we get in other countries, the work ethic that we gain in the other countries, and especially for me, because I think I spent my entire working life of 30 plus years in the US. So I came back to Kenya. I felt like I was coming to retire, but there is no retirement. I came and just started working. So for me, the experience of working in these other countries and really seeing the impact I'm having in other countries, I started thinking, what other impact what kind of impact can I have when I go back to my country, Kenya? And at that time, when I was coming back, the country was going through a transition. There was optimism, and then we had one of the greatest generations in this country since independence. Those are the kids who are born in mid 1990s to about 2010, 2015, about 2010, around that Gen Z, so to speak. In Kenya, I think Funsho will tell you that's the most creative generation in this country has ever seen. So I thought about how we can be able to get that young group of people to make them more economically, what I call economic citizens. That means converting somebody who is a net consumer of government services into a productive citizen who contributes something to the society. So my experience had taught me back in the US, of course, the work ethic is different. You go through the reverse culture shock. You're used to having things work the right way. The concept of time. I usually say when in the West, the concept of time is linear. And then when you go to developing countries and other countries, it's cyclical. So what's supposed to happen at night can always happen at 9:30. So all those things, you have to adjust to all of them. And then impact upon my local folks and the people who started working for me on the need to have some of these work habits that actually improves on productivity. And the first thing that I wanted to do was being a university president when I was back in the US. The first thing I wanted to was to open a university. Then I realized I was catering to about 12% of the population. That drove me into thinking, why don't I invest on the 88% of the population that at that time was not capable of joining the. So that's why I started now the training programs that impact on skill sets that are needed in the country. At the same time, I started looking at those vocations that actually will have an impact almost immediately, and therefore the short programs that can allow young people to come and specialize. Then I started looking at the sector and where the sector would have the most impact. And for me, agriculture was the most important sector for me at that particular time. So we started short programs where we have trained more than 10,000 young people over the last 7 years, which have expanded now to Ethiopia and then other countries as well.
Funsho, would you like to give us your sort of trajectory?
No, very shortly to follow on. I'm Nigerian, British, born in the UK, and then very swiftly, at the age of 2, went to live in Lagos, and lived there for 9 years or whatever it is before you come back and do sort of big school in the UK, secondary school in the UK. That was the first time I sort of made a country switch, or it's first 2 times. Then studied in France for a bit, worked in the US, France and the UK, and also Lagos and Nairobi. So been around a few different places. And so the diasporic experience, I felt much like Loksan in many different axes. And I think this is probably a bit more predictive of where people of our era will be a bit more experienced. I was a Brit in New York. I'm a Nigerian in Kenya. I'm a Kenyan in London. I was a Brit in Nigeria. There's so many different angles to this, but the parallels that come from all of our experiences will always be the same. It'll be if you have had to code switch or understand a different code in whichever country you're living in or spending time in, you have a much more refined and acute set of senses. And those then transfer into, just general aptitude. And it's almost like a free lunch if you've crossed borders a few times. So my current diasporic experiences being a Brit in Kenya or a Nigerian in Kenya, depending on who you're talking to. And that's always very interesting. And broadly speaking, it's been a positive. So, that's my diasporic story.
Super. Thank you very much, Funsho. Okay. Loksan, I met you last year. You were on a panel at the LSE Africa Forum. And I remember that there was a fintech founder on that panel who had moved from Africa to Europe in pursuit of capital for his startup. And he explained how he'd witnessed a reversal of this flow direction a few years later as investments started to flow back to Africa into tech hubs like Nairobi, Lagos, and Cape Town. So at a macro level, this illustrates the concept of capital flow, but also that of the so-called brain circulation, as opposed to brain drain. So if you could tell us a little bit more about this particular concept of brain circulation and how it impacts origin and destination locations, that would be great.
Sure. So I think traditionally we've often seen migration as this one-off event where someone would leave a country that did not have so much opportunity and move to a place which has opportunity. And I think this idea is now quite out of date. These days, you have people moving, they might leave their country for many different reasons, one of which could be still, less opportunity. And they would bring expertise, knowledge, capital, contacts to their new country, which benefits the new country in many ways. But they don't often just stay in that place. They may return physically, they may return virtually, so they may continue doing business, utilizing their networks in both countries to help their community in many ways. They'll be returning home, employ family members or contacts back home. So you end up with this brain circulation where there's that dynamic of the migrant or diaspora member then benefiting their community that they move to, and simultaneously also contributing to the community that they left or that they're not permanently in anymore. I remember, indeed, I think his name was Stone Atwine, the gentleman that you referred to
Yes.
on the panel. So shout out to him. And he's a Ugandan who founded a crypto payments remittances firm, if I remember correctly. And indeed, he moved to London in search of capital, and then found that a lot of venture capitalists were actually that he was interested in were actually operating more in Lagos and other big African tech hubs, which have really come a long way in recent years. And so he's now thinking about, I don't know if he's ended up doing this, but he was thinking about moving back. But it does illustrate that when we talk specifically about innovation and diaspora founded startups, there's that geographic arbitrage that they can take advantage of as well, right? So they can they can move in search of that capital. They can also use that capital that they get in the capital rich countries to then start businesses that are of benefit to their countries of origin, or that solve a problem that they observed in their countries of origin. So yeah, indeed, that concept of brain circulation, capital circulation, that is the reality of diaspora engagements today, and smart countries that we talked about, Ghana, Kenya, they're taking advantage of this. And just lastly, I was in Nairobi last week. Funsho made me think of this, and I caught up with a British Nigerian friend of mine who he just moved from London to Nairobi. He's got a British Nigerian wife and a British Nigerian son, and they didn't go to Lagos because they thought it'd be too hectic. They thought Nairobi would be a better hub, but they also wanted to go to Africa. So again, lots of layers to this, and he's come with the specific aim of investing. So yeah, again, brain circulation, capital circulation, lots of opportunities when it comes to innovation for Africa.
Excellent. Dominic, I think from my perspective, one of the fascinating things about what you've been discussing and what we talked about in a previous conversation is this idea of diaspora as being central to the diffusion of innovation. And I know that you have this labor export program to Japan and South Korea that you were talking about. So yes, feel free to expand on that. And maybe, yes, if you want to tell us a bit more about, how South Korea and China were leveraging their diaspora in that perspective, and how Africa can do something similar or different. What your views are on that?
The issue of labor migration, it's something that's been there for the last 50, 60 years. And some of the countries realize that. South Korea is a very good example that they realize that they cannot develop before coalescing all this knowledge that is residing in Koreans in other countries. In the Kenya and other countries, you like to say South Korea and Kenya was at the same level in the 1960s in terms of economic development. So what happened? There are many things that happened, and that deliberate reverse migration of very specialized labor into South Korea made a big difference. And that's what we would like to actually encourage our African countries to actually do, while at the same time looking at where opportunities still lie in other countries where we can get our young people, they go work, they make the living, then after that, they come back with the skill set that they have actually gotten in order to cross-fertilize with everybody else on the continent and in the country. In Vietnam, we had a program like that was sending guys who are working in construction in different countries. And you can see the amount of money that's coming into the country from the remittances for these guys. And then because they're going for a short period of time, then they come back and they go back again. Then you can see the impact in the skill sets when they come back and start mingling with the local communities. Some of them don't want to go back because they come and start small businesses because they have. That type, you have capital movement from the other side, from an intellectual part of it. The money they earn, they come and they start these small businesses. And that slowly end up being very large businesses, so to speak, in 15 to 20 years. Those are things that are possible. And we have seen that happen in India, for example. The entire tech industry in India was actually initially driven by those guys coming from the US. A lot of them came from the US, from Europe. And then we are now starting to see in some of the African countries, where now labor is moving to other countries and moving back. Like right now, we have groups that are going to Poland. We have groups that are going to other countries, and then they go stay there for 2 or 3 years or 4 years. When they come back, the whole work ethic is totally different from when they left to when they're coming back. So that combination of getting that foreign experience, coming back and employing whatever they learned from those countries to the local environment, and then that's why I call it cross fertilization. Cross fertilize that with the local folks. Then you have a more productive society, so to speak. Sometime last year, we held the first Diaspora Returnee conference here in Nairobi, and we had several hundred people who came. And you can see the amount of innovations and businesses that these returnees have been able to do since they come back. And also the movement of capital. They're coming in with their money. I think more or less what Loksan was saying. They're coming up and their capital is following them to where they're coming. So we have that infusion of both skill sets, capital and expertise that enriches the local business and labor environment. So I think the whole issue of reverse brain drain is absolutely necessary for African countries. And they need to be more deliberate in making sure that they're also harvesting where the brains are residing in other countries so they can come back and help their own countries as well.
Any comments on that, Funsho or Loksan?
If I may just plug China briefly into this, because China has such an amazing story when it comes to diaspora engagement, and this complements what Dominic was saying. You not only have the diaspora co-founders, startup co-founders. So you have one of the co-founders of Alibaba, Eric Xu, studying in America, the founder of Baidu, which is the Google of China, Robin Li, studied in America. 80% of Chinese students in STEM were returnees, ended up returning to China. So 80% of Chinese students in the US in STEM ended up returning to China. 60% of Chinese unicorns had a diaspora co-founder. So there's that innovation aspect of the founder who, is imbued with various influences. There's also the role of diaspora members as catalysts and change makers themselves. And what I mean by that is you not only have diaspora investing their own money, but you also have diaspora catalyzing other investments, right? And maybe Funsho can also speak to this, but for instance, there's a Chinese venture capital fund called Sequoia Capital that was founded by a Chinese diaspora member who was living in the US, who made the most of that position to then catalyze a lot more capital investment back in Chinese startups, and they've had a string of hugely successful investments in Chinese. A lot of e-commerce startups have had capital from them. Often when we talk about diaspora investment, there's this term that's used called the patriotic discount, right? I think it's used when people talk about the Nigerian diaspora bond, for instance. There's this notion that diaspora are willing to accept a lower return because they're more generous towards their communities of origin. And I like to reframe this as more of a sense of a diaspora dividend, in the sense that diaspora can often see opportunities in their home countries that other foreign investors might not see. And then they can help catalyze investment in that respect. And just very lastly on that, as you mentioned in my introduction, I've done a lot of work with the African Diaspora Network, and that was founded by Almaz Negash, who is originally from Eritrea and lived in the Silicon Valley, the San Francisco Bay Area for many years, and then started the ADN network, which then catalyzed a lot of philanthropic funding and support for African diaspora entrepreneurship, both in the US and back on the continent. So just to kind of add that, we not only have diaspora investors, we not only have diaspora returnees who start businesses or who work for businesses, but then we also have these change makers who catalyze lots of other capital flows as well.
Yeah. Funsho, would you like to comment on that last point, or?
Not really. I think it's very no, because I think we've covered a lot of the topics, and some of the parallels you see in China, you see at different levels here. Comments about capital following, the talent, the ability to see things and take a risk because you have a much more nuanced understanding of the terrain you're returning to, and therefore that makes your true risk reward much lower than your perceived risk reward on some of these endeavors. But I thought it makes perfect sense. I do think there's an interesting, for me, there's a very interesting sort of future of work question here, and think about where the opportunities globally are going forwards. What we have is an incredible amount of access to data today, which historically wasn't the case. And so virtual work, people went cross borders, being able to soak up experiences internationally and then apply them at home, that sort of thing. There's a lot of that sort of thing going on. And I think there is there's going to be a change in the kind of diasporic activity happening. And so I think we're going to see a lot more people being sort of shipped across for education, coming back, but potentially still working with stuff over there in the international markets. So talking about myself selfishly for a second, I invest across the continent with capital that is internationally sourced and spend some time in Europe, some time at home. I could do this from London, I could do this from here, I could do this from China, I could do this from Singapore, it doesn't matter. There's some context to being in Kenya, but investing in, I don't know, Sudan, which I have done in the past, I could do just as well from Dubai or from London as I could from here. So there's lots of stuff that's going to happen in the virtual space, which sort of confuses, muddies the waters a bit. And then future of work-wise, in the work that the Pharo Foundation is doing on the school side, it's fascinating seeing how rigorous we are with students and how we're giving them all of this work ethic. I can actually literally physically see that being imprinted on them when you look at some of the Guillaume speeches and some of the visits that the trustees do to these schools and the team. You can see this stuff going in there. And it's funny to me to think how that child may not have to leave to become diasporic, because now the world is sort of coming to them through virtual means. And I think that's actually quite interesting. I'm meeting a lot of kids around Nairobi in the Gen Z zone that Mr. Mwenja is talking about that feel as if they spend time in New York, but no. It's the entire time they're reading ideologies, they're watching content, they're reading things, they're looking at fashions, they're immersed in a variety of global cultures, which allows them to behave in a much more diasporic way, but physically locked into, Kenyan sovereignty. That's probably another research paper there for someone, maybe Loksan down the line.
Brilliant. Yeah, that strikes me as a great conclusion for the day, actually. Very strong point. Yeah, great. Thank you all so much. I thought it was a great discussion. So next up on Afri-CAN, we'll be discussing the concept of the developmental state and the role of the private sector in it. So going back, Dominic, to interesting comparisons as well with East Asia. And thinking about whether there's any lessons from the East Asian developmental model for Africa. Thank you all so much. Take care.